the president had some awareness of some big problem with the Epstein files, but nobody else around him did. And that's a little unusual from somebody who is famously gregarious and talks to a lot of people, and somebody who's been criticized for, being too open with information.
Well, we talked earlier this week about the FBI and Department of Justice's decision to essentially close the investigation into Jeffrey Epstein potentially running a blackmail operation. They said they found no credible evidence of that. They said they found no incriminating client list. And this just rocketed throughout both the MAGA world and now the Democratic world, the left world, that is rightfully pointing out what appears to be significant hypocrisy and flip-flops. Let's just start with the flip-flop point, where you have now Attorney General Pam Bondi going from saying she had a client list on her desk to saying there's no incriminating client list. She's explained that as saying she was just talking about the information generally, but you can understand why there's scrutiny of those statements now, of course. And on top of that, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino going from being very critical of prior administration's handling of the Epstein case and implying, arguing there was much more there was much more nefarious activity behind closed doors, and then saying they haven't seen any evidence, and seemingly going along with Attorney General Bondi, her decision. She's over Kash Patel. The FBI is part of the Department of Justice, so going along with those decisions. At the same time, something else interesting is happening. We just learned this week that Director Patel has opened investigations into former FBI Director James Comey and former CIA Director John Brennan. And those investigations appear to be around the question of perjury, involving things they claimed during the investigations into the Russia collusion investigation, the investigations into the investigations. So on the one hand, you have the people who are supposed to go into government, said they were going to go into government, and kind of peel back the curtain, failing to do that in the Epstein case. In interesting timing, confirming that they were doing that in the case of Brennan and Comey. And then on top of that, this is all happening against the fascinating backdrop of historical levels of transparency in the case of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Jefferson Morley is an expert in the Kennedy case. He is a highly regarded veteran journalist. And I want to put this post from him on July 8th on the screen. So that's just as of this week. He says, the Joanides file, referring to George Joanides, goes a long way toward explaining what was so sensitive about quote-unquote Howard's undercover assignment in 1963. It shows why the CIA hid the details from the Warren Commission in 1964. It explains why Joanides himself stonewalled the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1978. It illuminates why quote-unquote Howard's identity was denied to the Assassination Records Board review in 1998 and suppressed by the Biden White House as recently as 2023. And so what he's getting at there, I'll put up this article from Mark Caputo in Axios. This is his headline. CIA admits shadowy officer monitored Oswald before JFK assassination, new records reveal. So this is confirmation from, as Caputo puts it, a Thursday disclosure, so just a week ago, now that people have had time to sift through it, quote, nestled in a batch of 40 documents concerning Officer George Joanides. It indicates the CIA lied for decades about his role in the Kennedy case before and after the assassination, according to experts on JFK's slaying. The linchpin document, a January 17, 1963 CIA memo showing Joanides was directed to have an alias and fake driver's license bearing the name Howard Gebler. So that's what Jefferson Morley was referring to with Howard. And as Caputo continues, until Thursday, the agency had denied that those two were the same person, basically, that Joanides was known as Howard, the case officer name for the CIA contact who worked with activists from an anti-communist group opposed to Cuban dictator Fidel Castro called the Cuban Student Directorate. For decades, Caputo continues, the agency also falsely said it had nothing to do with the student group, which was instrumental in having Oswald's pro-Castro stances published soon after the shooting. So, what that means is that under the Trump administration and under his transparency directive, we are now getting information about the Kennedy assassination that even during prior eras, the Biden administration being the latest example, when there were efforts to disclose new documents and release new documents to the public, as the government has supposed to have been doing over time, things were being kept that are now critical things. Were intentionally being kept. And we know why, because it shows that there was malfeasance on the part of the CIA. The Trump administration, in this case, obviously released documents that are damning to prior eras of the CIA. One of the excuses we've heard for a long time that the Kennedy files could not be opened is that there are still people living who could be implicated, who could be in danger, and all of that. What we're seeing here is pretty much a suggestion when it comes to these particular Joanides related documents that nobody appears to be in danger as of right now, other than the reputation of the CIA. So we have these two things happening at the same time. You have a Trump administration that, largely because of what Donald Trump experienced over the course of his first administration and even his presidential campaign, involving the heightened scrutiny, surveillance by the American intelligence community, is absolutely interested in pressuring and forcing disclosure historically on the CIA, FBI, pursuing investigations into high-level figures. On the other hand, when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, I would argue, many experts have argued, is still keeping things behind closed doors and keeping things secret. So, Michael Shellenberger over at Public, which he founded, has published Jefferson Morley in conversation actually with Gerald Pausner, a famous sort of skeptic of the conspiracy theories about JFK. And I highly recommend taking a look at that debate and that back and forth. We're really excited to have Michael here because he has been covering the intelligence community very closely for the last several years and has a lot of insight into what might be happening that explains these two things going on at the same time. So Michael is the CBR Chair of Politics, Censorship, and Free Speech at the University of Austin. He is the founder of Public and the founder and president of Civilization Works, which was formerly called Environmental Progress. He is also an author of books like Apocalypse Never and San Francisco, Why Progressives Ruin Cities. Let's bring Michael Shellenberger in now. Michael, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Emily. Good to see you.
I want to start with this interesting juxtaposition right now on a beat that you have covered deeply for the last several years, which is, on the one hand, we are seeing historically more transparency in a shorter amount of time on the JFK files, also the RFK files, but that it gets different, MLK files too, but the JFK files in particular, from the Trump administration than we have arguably seen from any other administration since that tragic day. On the other hand, the last couple of days in particular have been marked by a lack of transparency when it comes to the files regarding Jeffrey Epstein. So as somebody who is covering this over at Public, can you just give us your sense, maybe from your sources and from studying what's been happening, what the hell is going on?
I was like, where is this headed? Where are we building towards here?
That's my question.
I mean, that's, I will say, so yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff we just have nobody knows what's going on. And we don't even know who knows and who doesn't know what's going on. I will say it seems like we do have some greater understanding now after this non-release of the Epstein files. One thing is that, first of all, not like your viewers or readers or Public's readers needed to know, but yes, there really is a deep state. It has a huge number of secrets. It's extremely powerful. And maybe there's like a deeper state below the deep state in the sense that, because of course, like the problem with the Epstein files, one of the questions is if they had something on Trump, for example, then why wouldn't Biden have used it? I mean, that's one of the best arguments for thinking that really they don't have anything on Trump. There's certainly another story that kind of goes, look, if it was what I think most people now think it is, people that certainly the journalists who looked at it, and then I'd say a huge, large number of people certainly on the right, but probably on the left too. I mean, it's hard to even say at this point, believe that this was a sex blackmail operation operated by an intelligence agency, and that obviously CIA was involved because Biden's CIA director was there at Epstein's house. The Wall Street Journal reported that. And then there's just a huge amount of, evidence suggesting that Mossad was also involved in some way. I just posted I just right before we got on, I just posted another interview that Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard professor emeritus of law, just put up there saying there's definitely an Epstein list. They're definitely not releasing it because of all the powerful people on it. Sean Spicer asked him, who, and Dershowitz said both politics and business. And it's wrong. We have Steve Bannon, one of President Trump's most loyal and longtime supporters, saying that the president should appoint a special prosecutor. I have to say, Emily, I'm very impressed by MAGA right now. I've had my clashes around free speech issues in particular, obviously don't agree with everything. But I'm very impressed that the MAGA base is not just sort of going away and just taking Trump's dismissal of this and Attorney General Pam Bondi's dismissal of it. So I think we've learned a lot of things. There's a very powerful deep state, huge number of secrets. You know, the MAGA base is actually an independent political force that is separate from the president, and that it has concerns that it will kind of break from him on or just permanently disagree. I think it is bad for the president's legitimacy. I mean, I don't think that President Trump understood that when he answered the question at the press conference a couple of days ago, but I do think it's a pretty significant blow to his legitimacy. And that's too bad because, just speaking personally, there's a lot of things that we need President Trump to do, and he needs to have the strength to do them. So anyway, that's a lot. I don't know if I have a good summary answer to your question, but I feel like we have, as usual, when things sort of tumult like that, you get a better picture of kind of how things exist, and even if we don't completely understand them.
Well, no, I mean, that's right. It sounds to me like the correct answer here is that we don't know. And one thing I wanted to ask you about actually is this interesting parallel where we've spent the last sort of several decades in fits and spurts getting information on what happened to President Kennedy. And I feel like the same thing has actually happened over the last couple of decades with Jeffrey Epstein. And it seems to me that we're almost heading in the same direction where, 30 years from now, perhaps, when there's a president who is less implicated by, for example, the JFK files, and protective of the CIA, and you can walk us through a little bit about what we're learning from George Giannides, because Jefferson Morley has written about it for you guys over at Public, but it took decades to even have that giant piece of the puzzle in place, and now it helps us see the picture more clearly. But to me, it just seems like that's sort of what we're heading for with Epstein. I'm curious what you make of that comparison.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's a great comparison and one that I've also, of course, been thinking a lot about. I mean, I think one of the most interesting data points is that when President Trump was being interviewed by Lex Friedman, to his credit, who's sort of a reputation as a softball interviewer, pressed the president, this was before he was elected, I believe. I mean, for sure it was, because he asked him, would you release the Epstein files? And he really pressed him on it. You just have to watch it because Trump grew visibly uncomfortable with the question, and then he pivoted, or as he calls it, weaved to the Kennedy files, which I was like, that's an interesting. I'm always interested in how people's train of thoughts go because you see what's associated with that. So he had some association in his mind between the Epstein files and the Kennedy files. One possibility, and look, we're just speculating here, but one possibility is that he sort of had a view already that he was going to be able to release the Kennedy files and that would be, some significant contribution, which I agree it is. But that really, yeah, the Epstein files was something that made him very uncomfortable. And you could see it there. And you contrast how uncomfortable he was with like everybody around him. I mean, the videos of Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, the director and deputy director of the FBI currently, the videos of Donald Trump Jr. I mean, it's almost like the president had some awareness of some big problem with the Epstein files, but nobody else around him did. And that's a little unusual from somebody who is famously gregarious and talks to a lot of people, and somebody who's been criticized for, being too open with information. So, I mean, there's just the other thing I was going to say, Emily, too, is another observation about what do we know about the current situation. I mean, of course, all the media stuff around how there's just no conspiracies. These are all right-wing conspiracies. There's just so many of them now. COVID origins, Hunter Biden laptop, Russiagate, Epstein, clearly proven to be true. And it also debunks this myth that the government can't keep secrets. That's one of the ways in which people dismiss the so-called conspiracy theories is by being like, oh, well, I've worked in government, and if you've ever met a government bureaucrat, you know they can't keep secrets. Obviously, they can. Obviously, they can, and they do to a large extent extremely well, and in some cases over decades.
Well, the case of George Joannides is a really good example of that. And the debate that you've hosted on Public between Gerald Pausner and Jefferson Morley on this question is fascinating, and people should go read it. Can you tell us, Michael, a little bit about how Jefferson and Public, and Jefferson, we should say, is a journalistic institution, very highly regarded, and an expert in this particular case, they're getting information from the CIA, in particular the Joannides file, declassified, that's genuinely proving to be helpful in this decades-long quest that Jefferson and others have had to put the puzzle pieces together on this. So that is a secret that was kept from the Warren Commission, if not outright lied about, to multiple congressional bodies, and it was kept. It absolutely remained secret until just now. It was sort of faintly observable, and people like Jefferson had suspicions and hunches, but now we actually know something significant, right?
Yeah, I mean, so this is George Ioannidis, who was CIA specialist in psychological operations, which is part of what's interesting here. He ran Cuban assets that basically promoted the idea that Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy because he was a communist and because he hated Kennedy because of the conflict with Cuba. That itself is sort of suspicious because we now know that, of course, Kennedy was very upset about the Bay of Pigs and pulled it back, and also, really wanted to pursue détente, including with Cuba. So already you start to see something very suspicious there. Gerald Posner is very well respected. He had a very good book. I mean, both him and Morley are worthy adversaries, and Gerald points out in his piece that we see this character in the CIA monitoring Lee Harvey Oswald. We see him show up in multiple CIA operations, but it's not clear what was going on there still. So we still are missing some pretty significant evidence. I've asked, Morley and others kind of what a picture of a conspiracy theory is here. For example, did they, basically have, Cuban shooters that were the second shooters taking out Kennedy? That was sort of the connection to Cuba, plus then they were able to pin it on Cuba. What role did MK Ultra play in this? I mean, one of the weirdest parts of this case, of course, is this character Jack Ruby tied to the mafia kills Lee Harvey Oswald, who has just said that he's a patsy. I think it's always been one of the most suspicious parts of it. And then Jack Ruby is visited in prison by Jolly West, who was famously overseeing the MK Ultra mind control experiments for the CIA. And then after he leaves, Jack Ruby goes psychotic. In fact, West leaves and says that he was psychotic there. So, yeah, I mean, yeah. So that's where we're at.
Oswald
You know,
himself, I forget when we learned this. That's one of the hard things about keeping track of all of this. But Oswald himself was stationed at a Marine base in Japan during the Korean War that was notorious for having done MK Ultra experiments. Like, there's an MK Ultra connection that could easily be made in this case.
yeah, and there is, and I will say, without giving away anything, there is more MK Ultra information out there, and there is more mind control history that people are unaware of, and some of it tied to Havana syndrome type activities, some of it tied to things around anomalous phenomena that are that seem like they're fringe. It appears that there's, that things get hidden sometimes. I mean, this gets into the whole UAP phenomenon, but things get sometimes, maybe these efforts get hidden as anomalous phenomena that are actually around mind control, efforts. So, it's sort of one of those things where you see at various points, the intelligence community will sort of say, oh, they tried to do these things and they just sort of stopped doing it. MK Ultra didn't really work. there's reasons to doubt that, and so to what extent is this stuff still going on? You know, one thing I'll say about the sex blackmail thing that actually makes me more optimistic is that I think it would be hard to pull off a sex blackmail operation right now because of the high level of awareness of it. And I'm friends with a member of a legislature in a foreign country, without naming names, who said that when his first day on arriving at Congress, they were warned to watch out for honeypots of women, of beautiful. Basically the guy got up and just said, "Y'all are really ugly. No beautiful. If some beautiful woman tries to sleep with you, you should be aware that somebody might be trying to entrap you or blackmail you." So I think that's a little bit harder to do. And the MK Ultra stuff, it has so much salience in the culture that also might be harder to do. But yeah, big secrets from the past. And I think the bottom line is we need Trump more than ever to allow this information to come out there. We need the Epstein files. We also need all of these other files, which are not coming out, and which I think it's fair to say is being blocked by very powerful elements within the intelligence community and deep state.
So this is my really big picture thought as you're going through all of that. I have the public story up here from Jefferson that says the new JFK files show Oswald figured in 6 different codenamed CIA operations in a short life, and that his actions were known to and discussed by senior CIA officers just weeks before JFK left for Dallas in November 1963. The Joanitas file debunks 6 decades of deceptive statements from the CIA about its knowledge of the so-called lone gunman before JFK was killed. In response, Pausner cites Case Closed, his book, and just pausing right there, what occurs to me is that when some of the stuff came out during the era of the Church Committee and the Pike Committee, we got reforms like FISA out of that era. And when we were learning about the Russia collusion investigation during the first Trump term and the Biden term, we were actually hearing Republicans start saying, we need a new Church Committee. We need a new era of reform to these agencies. And yes, Kash Patel is now investigating Brennan and Comey for their roles in potentially perjury throughout the Russia collusion investigation. But I don't know, Michael. I just don't feel like actually the Trump administration right now is focused on significantly reforming these agencies. There have been some ideas here or there, but it just sort of seems like they just wanted the keys all along. I don't know. What do you make of that? To watch the full version of this interview with Michael Shellenberger, go on, head over to undercurrents.tv for a full subscription. You get all kinds of great stuff and access to Unheard. So we'll see you over there if you want to watch the premium version of this conversation.